Hello, everyone, and welcome to World Book Day Book Club, September 2021. I'm your host, Kenny Baraka, and we are absolutely delighted to have with us today Lou Kunzler, the author of Our Beautiful Game, which is our World Book Day Book Club title of the month, September. How are you doing today, Lou?
I'm doing great, Kenny. Thank you so much for having me as part of World Book Day Book Club. I'm honoured and excited to be here. Thank you.
Lou, it's great to have you here. Could you tell us possibly a little bit more about yourself?
Great. Yes. Before we get to my characters, a little bit about me. I have been writing for a good few years now, and I've written all sorts of books across the range for all sorts of different ages of children. I write picture books for very young children, sort of through to historical novels, which Our Beautiful Game that we're talking about today is. And I love writing for children because as a child I lived very strongly in my imagination. I loved putting on plays, being make-believe, dressing up as characters, and I just think that I never quite grew up and stopped doing that. Where I lived as a child, I lived on Dartmoor, which is in Devon, and it's a very sort of windy, isolated place where I lived on a sheep farm, and there often weren't other kids around to play with. And so just living in my mind and having imaginary friends, and I'm just delighted that as an adult I get to continue to do that and have imaginary friends in the characters that I write and create, and turn into stories. So I think it's that sort of underpins who I am and why I want to tell stories.
With imagination being such a strong, I guess, impetus and inspiration for you, could you tell us how perhaps that inspiration led to Our Beautiful Game? So could you perhaps maybe introduce us a bit to the book and to the main character, Polly?
Absolutely. Yes, Kenny. The idea for Our Beautiful Game came to me one day when I was listening to the radio, and I heard this incredible story about how the FA, the Football Association, the male-led Football Association, banned women from playing football in 1921. So 100 years ago today, women were banned from playing football. And I thought, what is that about? What is going on? And so then I began to dig and to find out. And what very briefly, what happened at that time was the First World War, 1914 to 1918. Obviously, all the men went off to fight in that terrible war with the trenches and in Europe, and so lots of men from Britain and around the world went off to fight, and this left the women and girls at home, and many of them ended up working in munitions factories where they made shells and bombs and things for the war. And this was the first time that this had happened to young women, really, that young working class women, that young girls, very young girls often, would have gone off to work in service, to work as a maid in a big fancy house, which would mean you'd be on your own. And when you got any free time, which you didn't get much of, it had been just you as a young girl sort of hanging around outside, getting a breath of fresh air. Suddenly, working in factories, working together, there's masses of girls all together, young girls and young women. And crucially for our story, they're wearing trousers. And so suddenly football becomes really exciting in these factories, in a courtyard, and it becomes like school playtime, and they can play, and there are footballs there from when the men were there, and they start to play, and then they start to play big matches, and the women's game gets really exciting, and thousands of fans turn up to what had started as a bit of a joke, and it's also raising money for the wounded soldiers who are away at war. And this goes on, and this is great during the war, and then the war ends, and the men start to come back. And the Football Association get a bit worried because the women's game continues to be really popular and people continue to go to these games. And so they clamp down. And overnight, women have been playing at huge stadiums like, where Newcastle United, where Arsenal, where Tottenham, where these teams that we're still hearing about in the Premiership, those kind of, Stamford Bridge, these kind of huge stadiums is where the women have been playing during the war. So the FA say, overnight, you can no longer play in our stadiums, and you can no longer have a referee from the FA to look at your matches. So overnight, from being these huge, big, exciting games, the women's game goes back to being played in little, back of playgrounds, behind pubs, on a bit of waste ground, and it completely changes. And that ban stays in place until 1971. So 50 years women can't play football. And then you think now of the brilliant way that the women's game has recovered from that, and how exciting it is with the Lionesses. And we've just seen, even though it didn't quite go our way for Britain, but the Olympics, you see all these wonderful things that are happening, and at grassroots level, girls playing all over the place. And so it's such an exciting story. It's not a depressing story. It's a story about women and girls continuing to play and continuing to push through, despite people trying to stand in their way. And I just thought, this is a story that needs telling. Why am I, as old and ancient as I am, and I didn't know this story? Kids, girls, boys, children, readers need to know this story. And then at the heart of it, I put this character, Polly Nab, who is quite closely based on a real character who was called Lily Parr, who's probably one of the most famous female footballers of all time, who was very young when she was playing, 12, 14 years old, exactly like my Polly character, and was just full of energy and passion and anger and humour, and just was a great inspiration to base my Polly on.
Writing about history, someone might think is really quite hard. Would you be able to perhaps tell us how it is you approached writing a book based on historical events?
Absolutely. I love writing about history, because one of my favourite bits is all the research, and you read all about the period, and you discover what people ate, how they lit their houses, what clothes they wore, and all that sort of stuff. And then you do far, far, far too much of that. And your story, if you put everything you'd found out into your story, it would be like trying to find a needle in a haystack, as you search for the story through all that research. So one of the most painful bits is to get rid of all those lovely details, what kind of knickers they wore, and you think, this isn't relevant to my story, I don't need to put this in there, that sort of thing. But that's what I love about the preparation stage for writing a historical novel. But actually for this one, it was really interesting, because I wanted to, obviously, as I say, reference the character Lily Parr, who was this very famous footballer, but I decided quite early on I didn't want to make it about Lily herself, because there were so many other famous young players at that time, extraordinary young women, because also, as well as being about football, it's also about these young girls who were working in factories, working in munitions factories. And Lily herself didn't actually work in a munitions factory. And when I started my research, this was one of the really interesting things. I thought, well, I can't include that, because the girls wouldn't have been working in the munitions factories making guns and weapons, because they're too young. The girls I'm writing about, Polly in my story, is 12, and I thought you'd have to be 18, because this isn't Victorian times, this is the beginning of the last century. We think we've child labour laws and all the rest of it, but the more research I did, I found out that it was actually quite usual for girls and boys as young as 11, 12 years old to be working in these factories among really dangerous gunpowder and explosives and all. So that really changed my mind. And at that point, I thought, yes, this isn't just a story of a footballer, Lily Parr. This is a story of young working class girls in factories, girls playing football. And so that's why I invented Polly, to bring all that together in one place. And that really freed me up then. And then I actually then also invented the town and the football team, because I thought otherwise you're very stuck, because Lily Parr played for a very famous football team called the Dick Kerr ladies team, who are from Preston, and my town in my book is actually called Kirsten, which you'll notice is like a marrying of Kerr from the Dick Kerr and the Stun from Preston, because actually the thing about the Dick Kerr ladies team is they were so brilliant, they won everything and they beat everybody, and that's not a story. In a story, you need stuff to go wrong. And the Dick Kerr ladies were just too good. The story would have gone, once upon a time, there was this football team and they were fabulous and they won everything. The end. So my team, the Sparks struggle a little bit more. It's a little bit more difficult. And that gives Polly a real focus for her struggle. So you have to change things and mix things and blend things. And it's always a combination of imagination and fact. And bringing those two things together is the fun of it. It's like, adding your spices to your cooking. It's just making the perfect blend.
That's a fantastic segue, actually, because what I guess the other thing I wanted to know, one of the other things we wanted to know, was the process by which you create this really kind of living, visceral, fantastic character like Polly. How do you go about creating a character like Polly, and maybe some of the other characters in Our Beautiful Game?
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? But I think one of the things that I found very early on is this piece of paper that I stuck to my wall was something I printed out, which came from an original football programme at the time talking about Lily Parr, who Polly is so closely based on. And it said, Lily Parr, the Dick Kerr's outside left, is a phenomenal player, quite young, big, fast and powerful, is tricky and can take corner kicks better than most men and scores many goals from extraordinary angles with her left foot cross drive, which nearly breaks the net. She is a tomboy of the team who always says exactly what she thinks about everybody and everything, often to the amusement and embarrassment of the other members of the team. And I thought, oh my goodness. And I stuck that above my desk while I was writing, because I just thought it's got everything. It's got her skill as a footballer is there. But then also this other side, you know, that she says what she thinks, often to the amazement and embarrassment of the rest of the team. And I thought, oh, how does that make Lily or Polly feel that others are embarrassed by her? And why does she sort of say what she thinks? And I definitely think it's something that, you know, I definitely drew a little bit on myself as well as a mix of the sort of Lily Parr character myself, because I'm someone who often sort of says what I think out loud by mistake. And I think it's sometimes to do with being a little bit shy or a little bit, you know, so it's a blend of things. So that was lovely to have this. Honestly, this would be what, for, you know, those of you who write stories will know what you want to do is to start off with a sort of little description, a sort of back of a postcard description of your character. And this was a gift. I mean, I was just given this, which, as I say, true life, came from a real football programme from the time about Lily Parr, and I just thought that's the best character description you could ever have. And so that was really fun. And then from there, I built the other characters around it, and I wanted characters that were different than Lily. I think, you know, the two other girls who are sort of central to the story, Clara and Daph, are very different than Lily, you know, because it's a book about friendship and on all the different types of people that make up a team. And there's also the other, there's a young boy, Frank Cogley, who's one of my favourite characters in the story, because it's not just about girls' football. He's also a really keen player, and he's suffering too because his dad's gone off to the war. And one of my favourite scenes in the book, they're kicking an old tin can around, and Polly kicks it too hard and dents it, because they haven't got a football, so they're just kicking a can. And Polly kicks it really hard against the wall and dents it, and Frank gets furious, and Lily's like, what's the problem? It's only an old tin can. And it turns out that it's a lucky can that Frank's dad had given him, condensed milk, which was very precious, you know, delicious sweet food, that Frank's dad had given him just before he went off to fight in the war. So he's sort of got a sentimental attachment to a tin can. And that was from a little story that I read somewhere about, you know, kids at the time. And so it's lovely to be able to bring those things in. And Frank, again, is really tough, and you wouldn't know that he was feeling that. But we all got, you know, the layers of emotion that we hide. And that's the fun of producing character, is what we're showing on one stage. And the joy of writing a book is you can also show what the character's showing on the front, but also, of course, we tell the reader what's going on below the surface too. And that's always the fun of reading and writing, I think, isn't it?
Another fantastic segue. We found here at World Book Day Book Club that very often great writers, such as yourself, begin as really great readers. Can you tell us one or two of some of your favorite books, perhaps?
Yeah, I was not a great reader as a kid because I'm incredibly dyslexic. I really, really, you know, struggled as an early kid to get my ideas down on paper, and words would sort of jump around and you know, play mischief on the page, which, you know, for anyone listening to this recording today, you know, if you want to be a writer and you are dyslexic or you struggle in any way to get words down on paper, don't let anyone put you off. It's got nothing to do with imagination. In fact, you know, people with dyslexia often make great writers because, you know, all of us, we see the world in a slightly different way, and it enables us to, you know, to notice things other people might not notice. So, you know, push on, persevere, and, you know, tell your stories out loud, record them, do whatever you want to get them down. But so I struggled to read early on, but once I got going, I loved it. And one of the books that I particularly loved as a child was actually a historical novel, Q for Treason by Geoffrey Treece, which is about, a young boy called Peter who, for various reasons, has to run away from home because he gets in trouble and he has to hide from the law. And he joins Shakespeare's troupe of actors, where he finds this mysterious actor called Kit, who, I won't tell you quite who Kit is, but I wonder if you could guess from the name that Kit might not be all he or she seems to be. And they join Shakespeare's troupe and have incredible adventures. And I think it was that idea of sort of hiding the truth, and also being in Shakespeare's troupe, what could be more exciting, as they escape from justice. And this isn't actually my copy I had as a child. This is a copy I bought because I couldn't find my copy anywhere, and I was devastated. This is a copy I bought to read to my kids, and we all loved it as a family story too. And I think that's great when you really love a story, or when your mum or dad really loves a story, and it then gets passed down, like a precious heirloom. You can pass it through the generations. So if you haven't read Q for Treason, do. It's brilliant.
We here at World Book Day Book Club like to marry our books and our food. And particularly with Our Beautiful Game being set against this backdrop, this context of war and probably rationing, what food would you choose to pair with this book?
Great question, Kenny. There's a scene in Our Beautiful Game where Daff, who is Polly's friend, and Polly, it's Christmas, and they get an orange, which is all that kids, at that stage would have got for Christmas. Christmas wasn't all about masses and masses of presents, particularly in wartime, and particularly Polly's family are not a rich family. They're incredibly poor. So, but for lots of kids, just an orange would be the perfect treat for Christmas. And I think we still see oranges at Christmas time, don't we? And there's something about how bright and shiny they are, and the sort of promise that they offer in that dark period. And it's September, so we're moving into the winter. But think about the bright orange and Christmas coming, and how beautiful it'll be. But also I teach creative writing, so I was really pleased that it was an orange I got to talk about today, because when I talk to the adults who I teach to write children's books, I often talk about, a book being like an orange, because it's, you smell it and you feel it, and it's got all that promise, and you just want to rip it open and get to the story. And then you've got all those, tightly packed segments, which are like the chapters that you open up as you peel it back. However, if you are going to eat an orange while reading Our Beautiful Game, please get a good, tissue or a plate or something, because it's a very juicy, messy experience, and all the pages might end up sticking together. But it would definitely be the snack that I would choose to read with Our Beautiful Game. It even actually matches the cover. It's a lovely orangey sort of colour, isn't it? Brilliant. So enjoy your orange and enjoy the story.
So, we at the World Book Day Book Club like to ask a question of our readers about the book. Could you possibly give us a question about Our Beautiful Game that our readers might use to work through and explore different aspects of the story?
Oh gosh, I suppose because it's a historical story, a really interesting thing to ask might be, as you're reading it, to think if Polly, because when you're reading the story, you're sort of traveling back 100 years in time into Polly's world, and it might be fun to ask yourself, I wonder what Polly would find most surprising if she was to travel forward 100 years to our time. Suppose she was to join your class at school, what would she find most surprising? What would she find most difficult to settle in with? And I think there are really obvious things we'd instantly think of, like technology and things like that. But I often think it's quite good to maybe ask yourself sort of 5 questions sometimes, because I think the first thing you think of or provide 5 answers. The first thing you think of, technology or something, is sometimes the most obvious, and then by question 3 and 4, you get some interesting answers, and then by 5 you're probably getting silly, McDonald's, who knows, but in the middle there you might get some really interesting, thoughts. And actually food would definitely be one of the things you'd find surprising. Yeah. And then I suppose you could ask yourself the flip side of that. What would you find hardest to deal with if you went back into Polly's time?
Thank you everyone for joining us for this month's World Book Day Book Club. Really hope you've enjoyed thinking, talking, and hearing about books. All right? Please log on to the site and let us know how much you loved Our Beautiful Game. And finally, we have to say thank you to Lou Kunzler. Thank you for having us, and thank you for being with us.
Great. Thank you, Kenny. It's been an absolute joy and a pleasure to be with you today and be part of World Book Day Book Club. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for tuning in and listening, and enjoy your reading, and get out there and get your hands on as many books as you possibly can. Have a great day.